with the animals with a lower GDPR. Was that maybe to kind of the rationale behind one of your recent studies, like the double dose of GnRH at the beginning?
Well, the double dose, it was based on something else per se. It was like just like when we were looking the literature and some recent findings of our colleagues, it was that it seems that so that ovulation at the beginning of the ovsync, like historically, when you look at the set of response that you get, they are positively associated with, if you have higher ovulation at the beginning of the ovsync, you have better luteolysis afterwards, and then you have a more synchronous follicle growing, and you have better ovulation at the end of the program, you have higher pregnancy. So like, well, it is difficult to look at every response, have power to look at all. So we say, like, let's start somewhere. If you trigger them to start better for the synchronous program, if you have a more responsive group there, potentially that could be helpful. So there was some data from Julio Jordan when he was doing his PhD at Post-Freak Lab back in, to be published in 2012 and 13. This suggests that when you increase the dose, the percent of animals that ovulate is higher. So what suggest? Well, let me dial back. What it suggested mostly was that the LH release was higher, and they look at in two groups. They look at animals that were high in progesterone, and so let's say animals that supposedly would have a TL at the beginning of the program, and animals that were low, they look in the end of the program. So even though there is a response of LH that it's modulated by progesterone, the higher dose increase the release of LH, which is the major hormone that leads to ovulation at the high progesterone group, at the low progesterone group. And so that was suggested that from a biological standpoint, you have some desirable outcomes. Then there was some data from J.P. Martin's that suggested that ovulation response suggests no, it was significant for both primipairs and multipairs. It was improved, and they had pregnancy outcomes. They did see a difference in primipairs, but they didn't have different multipairs. When we look at what occurred, that's one of the things you have to be very mindful. The fact that conceptions are close to the 50%, like nowadays with these double ovsync programs, to find a difference when we know that they expect to be so high, to make studies that are highly powered, we need more animals. In that study, I think they only had like 150 animals in each group, which think like, well, it's a lot. Not necessarily if you are trying to improve from 50 to 53. When you go and do your power analysis, you will see that you need many hundred cows to do that. So that's one of the important. So what we tried to do then, was to do a larger studies, including multiple farms, and look at that response, because we are at the situation nowadays that we can achieve this close to 50% conception of the first services in these double ovsync programs. A little bit higher for primipairs, maybe a little bit lower or close to for the multipairs. So to increase beyond that point is difficult. So we're like, well, but if that triggering could improve, then there is a conversational point there, all right? So, and that's what, because the results were, let's say, from JP Martin's, were at least, let's say, on the right direction, we want to say, well, if you put it to test through a very properly powered multi-site, multi-state, that can we still see those differences? Because we know that one of the things with studies, they not necessarily always have the same results. There is inconsistency. It could be because the context is different. It might be the type of cow, might be the farm context, might be milk production, might be environment, might be heat stress, might be, there's so many factors, might be the tires you use, the distributions. Those studies are never simple. So that's why we went with doing a very large study. And then we had the opportunity to look at the ovulation at the beginning of the program. And we had farms that were actually genotyping all their cows. So it's like, all right, let's actually take a ride, just pick back on the opportunity and look at that. So like, what would be the response? And turn out that as JP Martinez had seen for his studies, the increased dose of GnRH, and by the way, we use gonadorelin hydrochloride. There's two major salts of gonadorelin. There's gonadorelin hydrochloride and there's gonadorelin diacetate. For that studies were gonadorelin hydrochloride. There was no, ovulation was better. It was better across the board for primiparous and multiparous. But there were no improved responses depend upon genome prediction of daughter pregnancy rate. And there was no interaction between the dose and the genome prediction of daughter pregnancy rate. So make a long story short, the dose was helpful, improved ovulation about 10% across the groups. And then that translates into a 3.5 increase in conception. You may think like, it's a modest increase. Yeah, but when you're already in the 50s and you make the math, it might be worthwhile. Okay, that's one of the things, like it's more difficult. It's like losing weight, just to do an analogy. When you're starting your journey and you are, let's say, on your beginning of it, you lose those for a few pounds might not be as difficult. But when you get close to that like ideal goal in the beginning, it's much harder to shred those 2 pounds because it's already let's say you worked out the inks that you have. That refinement, it's the challenge sometimes. And that's why I think, like, even though the improvement in pregnancy was not very high, we have 6,600 cows. We have 6,600 cows in that study, 4 farms, 2 from Wisconsin, 2 from California, different groups of people, different things. Then that allows you to be aware that the response is reliable. That's my take, right? Because you account for a lot of variability, a lot of contingency, and still seeing the results.